All right, we'll have to bring you that story and on another program, hopefully tomorrow, quite an uplifting one. But at the moment, we're going to have to cross straight over to the TNA. Peter Ndoro is hosting it this morning, and he's out in Woodmead. So let's find out who his guests are and what's on the program. Peter, good morning to you and your guests.
A very good morning to you, Leanne, and good morning to everybody at home. Yeah, today we're in Woodmead, just north of Johannesburg, for the latest in a series of New Age business briefings brought to you by the SABC, and today very kindly sponsored by Transnet. And today we're taking a look at a topic which I'll broadly describe as financial liberation. I mean, I guess the backdrop really is we talk about inequality all the time. We talk about this new South Africa that we've been enjoying since 1994. But one of the challenges that we're seeing is things like access to finance. If you want to buy a car, if you want to buy a house, if you want to start a business, one of the challenges that ordinary people on the street have is how do they even get onto that lending game? How do they even begin to get access to finance? And we've seen over the years, and back in the day certainly, we had these informal lenders that kind of consumed us. And the hope was that we would be able to join the formal sector in lending, but it hasn't happened. And we need to try and explore why. Does there need to be a paradigm shift in terms of how we create financing, how we assist people get capital? We take a look at our capital markets, like the JSE, for example. And again, there will be arguments and debates about who owns it, and how do we get more and more people of color to be getting access to capital on financial markets such as that. So to help us explore this, we'd like you to contribute. Hashtag TNABizBrief at Morning Live SABC is our Twitter handle. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are, what your challenges have been, particularly around getting access to finance, and the whole equation of financial liberation. But it'll start to make a lot more sense as the discussion itself unfolds. And to help us with that discussion, I've got a panel of 4 people here, but I do again say you must be very much a part of this conversation. Starting to my right, I have Mr. Leon Louw, who's the Executive Director and Co-founder of the Free Market Foundation. Always good to have you. Welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure to be with you and the viewers and the audience. And the panelists.
There you go. Next to you, we've had you before, and I think a lot of people may have read something that you've written over time as a writer, author, columnist, social commentator, also businesswoman. Khoabane, thank you very much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you for having me, but I'm not a businesswoman.
Oh, but no. You were at one stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you
Gave
go.
It up.
So always, well, once a businesswoman, always a businesswoman. Next to you, somebody who's very familiar, I think, on our television screens and radios, because he's the leader of the Black First, Land First movement, Mr. Andile Mngxitama. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to you.
Thank you, Peter, and the viewers.
Right, and next to you, an academic, political analyst, Sifiso Mahlanga. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Ndoro.
All right, okay, let me start with you, Leon. We're talking about this financial liberation term, and I'm just wondering, and I'm going to ask all of you, just kind of, what does that mean to you if we say financial liberation? It's 2017. Where should we be, given that 1994, we had an opportunity to change the game? It was horribly skewed towards a minority of people, and we should be better off now. But for some reason, this isn't something that we're all enjoying. What's gone wrong? What does this financial liberation mean, and what should it look like? Leon?
Well, let's first be clear about the fact that a lot has been accomplished. A lot is outstanding. There's a lot of poverty. We have to find out what to do about it, and a lot of inequality. But at the same time, I think we in South Africa talk ourselves down too much and don't acknowledge what's been accomplished since '94. And, I'm aware of the fact that I am the Mlungu on this stage. And I hope people will listen to what I say, listen to the message, not the messenger. And that's difficult. It's very difficult in South Africa, and I fully understand that people tend to look at one's race, color, position, whether you're wearing a tie or not. But let's try and talk about the facts. I actually wanted to get my colleague to come on a young black South African instead, and he said he couldn't, and he said, just tell the truth. So that's what I'll do. So let's look at this. Firstly, what's been accomplished. And I think we undersell ourselves in South Africa. If you look at, for example, the presidency publishes a thing called the 20-year review, produced primarily by Stats SA, objective facts and figures. And it shows an extreme accomplishment. The number of people who have access to education, literacy, motorized transport, telecommunications. Probably the single most important statistic is life expectancy. We have one of the fastest rising life expectancies in the world, despite HIV, AIDS, and other problems we face in the healthcare system. By every single objective measure, access to food, housing, water, South Africans have actually done very well, and in particular, since race is an omnipresent fact in our discussions, black South Africans. Now, if one says that, as the presidency does, and Stats SA does, it doesn't mean that we have an unfinished agenda, or a finished agenda. We have an unfinished agenda. So what financial liberation means is to get for as many people as possible the ability to live what we consider to be a decent life. And that's difficult to define, but let's say, for example, middle class, which is an economic definition. In 94, less than 1 million black South Africans were so-called middle class, as defined. Something like 600,000, 700,000. It's now over 6 million. That is 6 million people who now have credit cards and bank accounts and motor cars and TV sets and fridges and microwaves and so on. That's wonderful. That's something we should be proud of and has been achieved in the new South Africa. But that leaves another 30 million or so who haven't got there yet. And I like to think of it as a soccer field. One half is where the poor people are, and one half is where the not so poor people are. What we want is more people to move across from the poor half to the rich half. We should be obsessed about the people on the poor half. The inequality debate is usually obsessed about the people on the rich half. Take, for example, this Oxfam report. It makes just nonsensical statements. It says the top 8 people in the world own as much wealth as the bottom half of the world. Just the cell phones owned by the bottom half of the world are worth more than all of the wealth in the hands of the top 8. And I could explain why Oxfam comes up with this nonsense. I call it Oxcam. But what we want to do is don't worry about who's on the rich side. Get the people from the poor side to the rich side. We've been doing that. It's actually been quite an impressive performance.
We need to do it quicker.
We want more of it, we want it quicker, and that's what financial liberation is getting everybody from the poor half onto the rich half and stop worrying about what happens on the rich half.
All right, that's a good start, and we'll explore that a little bit further, and I'm sure that we're going to hear some other views on that. But what about you, Pinky Khoabane?
My colleague here has given us the stats. We all know the stats. 22 years we've been dealing with statistics. But the real issue, and we sit today, we need to talk about economic freedom. We've had that credit card, which, and a big middle class, which is a paycheck away from junk status. And these people are said to be middle class when they actually live basic lives, What we actually need to do is for this government to now be bold. We have a constitution that deals with redress. Redress in terms of, we talk about inequalities. Those inequalities, our constitution says they can be redressed, and black people and those who have been marginalized by apartheid need to actually get those benefits. Our government is afraid, it's not bold enough to be out there and say, look, in terms of procurement, this is how we're going to do it. We don't care who says what. What happens in this country is that you find political parties that can take this government to court and actually win, despite the whole idea of transformation. We want economic transformation. We've had political transformation. I mean, this whole notion that people are going to be, onto banks and getting credit cards to live. We have to think beyond just this notion that you must get a loan to be able to move on in life. We must build entrepreneurs. We must open those doors. These financial systems must offer people money, and make them become entrepreneurs instead of building this nation of lenders beholden to banks before they can do anything. So, yes, we need that economic freedom. That's what we need, financial freedom.
A lot of things which will start a lot of conversations, actually, which is interesting. And we'll explore them again in a short while. Andile, let's come to you. Black first, land first. Is that where we start?
Yes, I suppose on the critical question of how do we get people in a nation, in a society, to become financially independent and liberated? The first thing I think is the truth. The first truth is that it's a myth, this notion of a black middle class. Black middle class is black people who have a job, who have a credit card, who all of them are getting blacklisted because we can't service our debt, and we are told that is actually an achievement. Why is this situation of black majority exclusion? It is because of a state deliberate policy. The colonialist and apartheid governments were absolutely clear about empowering white people. Money was moved literally from the Reserve Bank into many small corporations corporations owned by white people, including this Bancorp, is the agricultural sector, even in the media, literally. Now, our government has not done so. So we're sitting here with notions of meritocracy, hard work, individual excellence, as if the problems of exclusions of the black majority is our problem. It is not our problem. It was created deliberately by a state policy. Now, what we don't have, and that's why 23 years we're sitting here as black people, we have nothing. Black people, let's start with the truth, we have nothing, right? And white people literally have everything. They did not get everything because they work hard. They have everything because they oppressed us, they dispossessed us. And today I think it's important to say, if we're going to talk seriously about financial liberation for the black majority, we have to speak from the perspective of the black majority. The treasury is key. The South African Reserve Bank is key. Now, we unfortunately have a minister, Pravin Gordhan, who has shares in these banks who are holding monopoly. Any one of you want to actually start a bank in South Africa will find that all these 4 or 5 banks are not going to allow you to do so because it's going to become competition. Why is that?
Is that because a fact that he's got shares? I mean,
of course, it's an absolute fact.
Because he has to declare them in Parliament, right? As a minister.
He's declared. That's why he's declared them.
Okay.
He's declared that he's got shares in these banks. And these banks are basically have a monopoly in South African economy. And these banks have a serious, again, control of the South African Reserve Bank. I mean, small banks such as the Habib Bank, who are trying to come in, has been stopped. The Competition Commission said, allow the bank to come through. Black people, a lot of the time, talk about black banks. This is not going to happen as long as you have a minister who is beholden to this white monopoly and cartel in the banking system. So that's just a very important question. If you ask us what to do, later on we'll tell you exactly what to do with Pravin, what to do with Treasury, what to do with the Reserve Bank. But the key thing is, some of the things the Afrikaners did are some things that we must stop being apologetic. You know, Afrikaners literally gave instructions to the Minister of Finance back then. You will give money to these following corporations to maintain white supremacy and to maintain white people's interest in the economy. We don't have a similar situation on the other hand. Yes, why is our government not speaking with confidence and resoluteness and saying, now is the time for black people to benefit? If you can't do that, we will be sitting here again in another 20 years.
But the government has been talking about radical economic transformation. Sifiso, your thoughts?
Well, funny you should ask if Mr. Mngxitama really knows if the minister has shares because he needed to declare it to Parliament. But you must also remember that Mr. Mngxitama at one point was a member of Parliament. So I think some things he would know better than you and I.
Yeah.
I think the reality is we should stop talking about financial liberation in codes. It's very nice to have very good policies, but that don't infiltrate to the people. If we're going to talk about financial inclusion, then we must start at the bottom and work our way up. The policy is good and a mall comes to Soweto and all of our people think we're going to get jobs. All they will do is get jobs at KFC and ShopRite and at Jet and work throughout the weekends. But what that mall will do is it will eradicate other small businesses in Dobsonville. The people who had spaza shops will have to close because a big mall has now entered. That mall will not empower the people. They'll just have jobs. They'll run around with CVs. How will that develop the country? So we must stop playing a monopolistic game in the name of development. And so we talk about development, but we shade it with white monopoly capital. So it's white monopoly capital and white monopoly interest shaded as development into the townships. If we're going to address an issue of white liberation, we've got to see how radical it can be, how our people will progress from the codes of development, how to get SMMEs money through our government, how to empower young leaders, whether they are black or white, as long as they are young and they've got good business plans that can develop this nation, how we can empower the tourism, the agricultural sector, the music sector, the fashion sector, how those things can be implemented. But we must, even as a country, have a nuanced conversation to say we should stop hiding behind development and say we are developing our people as whilst we are just giving them menial jobs, but there is a consortium.
If we made no progress, Leon says 6 million people now are sitting in the middle class, whereas it was 1 million before. That's huge.
I think the issue here, Peter, is very simple. The Afrikaans government really did do a lot. But if you are only servicing 30% of the population, you will do a lot. But if this government has to, satisfy 100% of the population, they've got a morbid task ahead of them. No one is trying to reverse or ridicule what has been achieved in 23 years. But our people cannot develop with giving them menial jobs and saying, well, we are developing the nation. What they want is financial inclusion. They also want to be stakeholders of this economy. They also want to own this economy. They don't just want to work at the mine, they want mining rights.
Okay. All right, so you've all heard each other, and what I'm going to do again, I'm going to start with you, Leon. Either add to what you were saying earlier, or give feedback to each other, and then we'll start opening up the conversation. I have a number of questions that I will raise myself, but I just want to give you another sort of bite at the cherry. I'll start with you, Leon.
Yes. Firstly, I think it's quite interesting that people tend to get binary. It's all good or all bad. The world isn't like that. It's more complicated and nuanced. And the President's 20-year review, which is basically all the good statistics, but the fact is there's a lot. Housing, education, welfare, infrastructure, health services, access to food, etc., etc. Now, I think one has to start by saying, how was that achieved and how can we do more of it? How can we build on it? One of the other things is that I'm glad to have Andile here, and I hope we can get into a discussion about land. Because what we have in South Africa is we have 10 million, roughly, it's probably 8 or so, but a nice round number, 10 million black South Africans who already occupy land. Why, after more than 20 years, they do not all own that land is a mystery to me. They should just be owners. Now, if you want financial inclusion and empowerment, at no cost to anybody, they could all get title deeds. If the 1913 Natives Land Act still governs South Africa to this day, the ghost of Verwoerd, by the way, is sitting in the corner over there with a big smile on his face. And he says, if I knew the ANC would implement my land policy, I would have given them power long ago. Why haven't they got rid of it? Now, in terms of land, we're talking about R1 trillion worth of wealth. It's already held by black South Africans. All they have to be is, here's your deed. Then they will have access to finance, they'll get small business loans, they can educate their children, they can improve their housing and so on. So that's one. But let me tell you something else. What the government, everyone sits around, and this discussion I can see is headed towards what the government should do for people. I would like some attention to what the government does against people. Now, just to give you an example, in South Africa, we used to have a flourishing Black Brokers Association. It was one of the areas where black South Africans were advancing most rapidly. Thousands of people were becoming brokers, financial brokers and service providers. We then got the Financial Advisory and Intermediary Services Act and the Financial Services Board, which is now being turned into an even bigger and worse and more dangerous monster called Twin Peaks. It virtually destroyed one of the few areas of very spectacular black entrepreneurial advancement. It's gone. There's virtually none left. And what has it done? It's made it talk of the banks. We've heard about the banks. That agency basically prevents black South Africans from entering into the financial services sector and accessing financial services. Something they boasted to Parliament when Andile was in Parliament, I think. They appeared over there and said they were proud of the fact that they had delisted 15,000 brokers, financial services providers. What color do you think they were? What color do you think their customers were? And we all know the answer to that. So there's another one, the National Credit Act. It's paraded as if it somehow makes credit cheap. No, what it does is it means poor people cannot access credit. All the credit goes to rich people. That act makes it difficult and dangerous to provide credit, which is why the Moshanishas and the money lenders you talk about move into the vacuum that is created by the regulatory agencies. If you want to know what the enemy is to financial inclusion and liberation, it is the government, and what the government has to do is stop doing things, not start doing things. What it's doing is causing the problem. It is destroying any opportunity for poor people, regardless of race. I mean, I know everyone talks race, but low-income people are being excluded by government policy, the Financial Services Board, the Treasury, the Reserve Bank, from entering in, and the insurance by entering into the country's economy.
All right, so, and I'm going to come to you, Pinky. So we're hearing that policy might be the issue here. But, you know, in their defense, they might say, listen, if we don't regulate these industries, people can become vulnerable to unscrupulous people, and people who, if there's too many, if there are low barriers to entry, then you get bad advice from people. So that might be an argument in setting up these rules. You might get a situation where you lend money to people who can't afford to pay it back. This is what caused the 2008 financial crisis.
If you're rich like you, you love the policy, you get into the castle and the government pulls up the drawbridge behind you so no one else can get in.
Okay, interesting. Your thoughts?
Look, the policy, some of the policies go completely against black people. I mean, you look at something like the PPPFA, you look at BEE. BEE today, as we often say, is now we, as in white economic empowerment. These are policies which the ANC set out to do. I mean, I wish Danisa Baloyi was here to tell you, she was in the commission of BEE commission, and they set out this beautiful policy, which they then gave to government. Government gave to a white consultant, and what comes out at the end is just not what they wanted. PPPFA, we hear the consultant was an Australian. It doesn't work for black people. You know, we have all these policies beautifully done outside. They come into government. Government has no, as I say, they have no they're not bold enough to be able to say, this is the policy. Some of these people even, you know, they go to parliament and ratify some of these policies. It is absolutely true that some of these policies work against the black people. And the point is, for us, we have to actually ask this question. Why is it that a government for the black people is actually doing this? And it comes back to one thing. The ANC has too many people I mean, when you look at who sponsored who prior to 1993, who controls Treasury, it remains white people control how things work economically, and how the ANC ends up ruling. I mean, why would a government honestly take a policy? Black people sat down, came up with the BEE policy, and then they give it to white people to then water down. For what good reason? It's almost as if somebody is paying somebody back, and that's how it works. Right. And that's where the stumbling block is.
A little bit more later on, but Andile, I know you have an issue with the banks in particular. And I'm just wondering, do we not need a paradigm shift, actually? And say, look, these banks are doing what they're doing. Let them do what they need to do. In India, the Grameen Bank came about to circumvent, or as an option, an alternative to this traditional way of financing. Shouldn't we be thinking along those lines? Things like M-Pesa have come out of Africa. Can't we be Grameening in Africa, in South Africa?
Yes, absolutely. The problem, though, is if you leave the monopoly of these white banks intact, you'll never be able to do what you suggest. Because what they then do, they block everyone. And you have a minister who's beholden to the same banks, who's supposed to regulate a level of policy for the inclusion of more banks. And if that minister is on the side of the big banks, you're never going to be able to do what you're suggesting. Yesterday I had a very interesting conversation with a young black doctor from KwaZulu-Natal. He told me that he got the best education from his grandfather, who was uneducated but went to Itala Bank. Itala Bank gave an uneducated person money to start a business. It was a successful business. He was able to educate his grandchildren. You know what the medical doctor tells me? He himself today can get a loan from a bank when he wanted to diversify. So you have white banks which are not going to open up this space. We need a radical call. In fact, the minister must be removed, I think. This is one of the big things. The minister must be removed. Praveen must go. We bring a minister who's unapologetic, a minister who will go inside the Reserve Bank, serve black people. Until that happens, we're not going to be able to do. And it is a good proposition, Peter. We need more banks. We need more black banks. In fact, let us think about it. Our government can use the great work done by the new public protector on ABSA. We know, all of us here, that ABSA owes us, the people of South Africa, more than 3 billion rand. We know that. That money was stolen from the Reserve Bank. Our government should be doing a very simple thing. Recall your accounts from ABSA, because it's a lot of money every month. Take this money, put it into black banks, strengthen those who exist, establish new ones, even put them at the community level. In this way, I believe that our people can get better access. But let us deal with the issue raised by somebody from the Free Market Foundation. You see, white people have been served by the apartheid government. They benefited from what the government did. Today, a narrative runs that government must not do. Our problem as black people is that our government has not done enough for us. Not that government must stop doing things. Of course, we must insist. Government, stop listening to what white media says. Government, stop listening to what those who stole our land says. In fact, on the land question, again, there is no financial liberation without dealing with the land question. Because land is the biggest asset you can have and the most secured asset. In South Africa today, we sit with 35,000 white people owning 80% of the land. That is the truth. 35,000 white families own 80% of South African land. It will take us more than 100 years to buy back only 30% of the land. So, yes, there's a big disappointment we have in our government. When President Zuma says we need radical economic transformation, the opposition parties, the media, go and say President Zuma is captured by the Guptas. Anyone who says we want radical transformation, anyone who says let us deal with white monopoly capital, they say you are a Gupta agent because they want to stop us from confronting white capital. So here is the point. I think we must say to the agents of Johan Rupert and opposition parties controlled by London, when black people who are leaders go to London, when they come back, they are changed people. We must ask our leaders not to go to London, because right now in South Africa, the battle we have, we're trying to get economic liberation. Our brothers who went to London are standing on the side of the enemy and attacking us who want radical transformation.
Okay.
Let us call the president of the country to know he has support when he says he wants radical transformation. And President Zuma must press on, and we must make sure that we are liberated in this country. We must stop listening to white people, and also taking us to court every 5 minutes means that we must just mobilize, occupy the land, occupy the banks.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get a thought from you, Sifiso. At Morning Live SABC, hashtag TNA Biz Brief, and this kind of conversation can go in many directions. And the issue really at the end of it, at the heart of this, is financial inclusion. How do we get access to this finance? How can we change and shift this inequality, create a bigger middle class, black middle class, shift them from one half to the next? Your thoughts and your questions, we'll start taking them after this.